Welcome to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, even if you can stand the heat, stay far away from this kitchen. This is The Kitchen. Welcome to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I'm Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like The Kitchen, which we'll be talking about today. But before we get into that, Ian, how has your week been?
I had a plant-based lunch today. No meat whatsoever. Macaroni and cheese with a Z. So I feel pretty righteous. Scientists have been calling me up like, hey, that 1.5 degrees Celsius target we were talking about, maybe that's realistic after all. And I was feeling pretty good about myself.
I saw something this week that there will be 125 degree days in Missouri by 2055.
Yikes.
At the rate we're going. So maybe it'll be like 122 because of you, buddy. Rest easy. You've done your part, eating
Thank
a child's meal.
Feels good.
And how's your tummy feeling?
So far, so good. I hope it holds up.
All right, excellent.
How you doing?
Better than last week. I did not get accused of shoplifting this week, so that's a win in my book.
Oh, good.
Had a good weekend bip-bopping around the city with some friends. We did not make it to Hell's Kitchen, unfortunately. We were further downtown, but we were in New York doing a little bar brewery hopping deal. Had some good beers and some good foods and some good laughs, which is all you really want out of a weekend.
Yeah, that's a beer commercial weekend, man. Bros and brews.
There's no twins. It's not the late 90s. There was no twins on this excursion.
Just man friendships.
And there was a lady there as well.
Even better.
I mean, by the law of large numbers, we probably did cross paths with a twin.
Sure.
We were in Manhattan for 10 hours, walked by tens of thousands of people. Probably one of them had to be a twin. But we didn't see like two twins wearing matching outfits.
New York has changed, man. New York is not the same.
No more water balloon fights between blonde twins. But no, it was a pretty good week. Did you find some time to watch anything you wanted to share with the listeners?
So this week, our episode is a movie about three women who wanted to become gangsters. So I watched a movie about one man who really didn't want to become a gangster. It's called A Most Violent Year, 2014 movie, written and directed by J.C. Shandor of Margin Call fame, which I also saw at your recommendation early on when we started this pod. Fun movie. Well, maybe fun's not the right word.
I wouldn't call it fun. Well made.
It's a very well made movie. Great performances. Oscar Isaac, Jessica Chastain, David Oyelowo, Albert Brooks is great in it. Really smart, mature filmmaking. It's like this slow burn thriller, and it shows a ton of restraint because it never really gives into the salacious violence, although you might have thought you were going to get some from the title. But yet, even without pulling that trigger and going big in Hollywood and splashy on you, it manages to tell this very intense, compelling story, and the stakes feel really big and serious, and it's just a cool movie. I liked it.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that Oscar Isaac and Jessica Chastain have played a married couple more than once now, because they were also in the recent HBO miniseries. Oh, and they've also been seen with displays of PDA. Oh, Scenes from a Marriage, which came out in 2021. It was very well reviewed. I did not get a chance to check it out, even though I'm a big fan of both those actors. And yeah, Most Violent Year is great. J.C. Shandor will be directing the Kraven the Hunter movie next, which feels weird. We briefly touched on that at the end of the Morbius episode. It's going to be part of that shared universe they're trying to build. But A Most Violent Year, I really liked. It's understated. It reminded me more of a James Gray movie than like a Scorsese movie. It takes place in these kind of nefarious worlds, and there's shady dealings going on, but it still manages to be like kind of buttoned up about it all.
His whole thing is I'm trying to live my life and do my business right and not be a gangster.
Sadly, Most Violent Year did not do so well at the box office. So when you mentioned it to me and you also mentioned it was a bomb, I said, let's throw that bad boy on the list because that would be a fun one to talk about. So we're going to keep it relatively short here so we have something to say.
We'll get back around to it in a little bit.
Like 2 years. That's how far up the list is going now.
Stay tuned, folks.
And I watched something a little more recent, but also now I can't find any common ground between these two movies except they kind of deal with crime from an outsider's point of view for most of it. But I watched Vengeance, the new BJ Novak written, directed, starring vehicle, his directorial debut for a feature film about a writer from New York who is kind of strong-armed into going to a funeral for an ex-hookup in Texas and thinks he might have the makings of a hit podcast.
Very relatable.
Podcasting is becoming a very cinematic job lately, which is weird to see. There's a lot of movies coming out about podcasters, shows where main character's a podcaster. It's like the new architect. Do you remember when every protagonist in a movie or show was an architect for a good 7 or 8 years?
Architects are boring. Who wants to do that when you can podcast?
We know how to make buildings by now. We don't know how to make the perfect podcast. It's still aspirational. Well, I think we do. Where's our movie? But no, I've always liked BJ Novak. He has like a douchiness to him that he really leans into in this movie in a self-aware way. But I've always enjoyed him as an actor, and he's obviously a talented writer. He's written for a lot of different stuff. And this is like putting himself front and center. And I think it largely works. The reviews were positive. It's got Boyd Holbrook in a mostly comedic performance, I would say, which I love. I'm a big Boyd Holbrook fan. I bought a lot of stock in Boyd Holbrook back in the early days of Narcos, and it hasn't really paid off yet, but I think it's going to.
This is a sign, yeah.
This is the first step of the Holbrook renaissance. And Ashton Kutcher in a very solid supporting role. He doesn't really act as much anymore. I think he made a lot of money elsewhere, so he just picks and chooses his projects very carefully. But I think he's good friends with Novak in real life and came out of retirement for this one.
That's a cool twist.
And he rounded out the cast with a lot of really good, funny actors like J. Smith Cameron, Jerry from Succession, who I'm a big fan of. If you watch Succession, you cannot not love Jerry. Issa Rae is a big supporting role. Even John Mayer pops up as maybe John Mayer. You might have seen her tweet about it. His name is John in the movie. No last name is ever given, but he's acting like John Mayer would, I imagine. And Luann Stevens from Friday Night Lights, Matt Saracen's grandma. She's still playing grandmas 15 years later. Bless her. She was just on Better Call Saul also, playing someone's grandma. She's found her niche. But yeah, really recommended it. It's, I don't know if you'd call it a dark comedy or a thriller with a lot of comedic elements, but it's got the goods. I'm excited to see what he does next, because this is the type of movie we lament that doesn't get made anymore. I wanted to see it in theaters, and it was a very limited release, and it was gone in 2 weeks, and I just never got around to it. So I was thrilled to see it pop up on streaming shortly after.
Yeah, I like seeing this kind of movie. It's not really the same thing, but it reminds me of Palm Springs, which was an indie comedy with other elements that sort of came out of nowhere from some funny people and had a lot of charm, and was like the kind of movie like, I didn't know anyone was making this thing. And then you watch it and you go, that was really fun. Yeah,
and Palm Springs had a surprising emotional core to it. This movie's a little, I would say it's definitely more serious, a little darker than Palm Springs was, but that comparison holds a little bit of weight. I could see that. I love Palm Springs, by the way. I've been meaning to rewatch it. I haven't seen it since it was initially released. I still play the soundtrack quite often. Great soundtrack to that movie. All right, so The Kitchen. Ian, you got to tell me, this movie's only 3 years old. Do you remember when it came out? Did you see the trailer, the posters, anything? Well, what was your deal with this movie?
Turns out, just like one of the stereotypical male chauvinist husbands in this movie, I was totally unfamiliar with The Kitchen. And once I saw what was going on in the kitchen, I realized maybe I should have been helping out in the kitchen, because they made a mess of the kitchen. But no, I wouldn't have been able to tell you that that was a movie, but which was fun. It was another one of those surprises, but it didn't quite have the payoff of.
I was going to say, was it fun? I don't know.
The idea was fun. I'm like, a colorful box cover that I can go, oh, that should be fun. Let me turn it on. We'll talk about how it wasn't exactly as fun as we hoped.
I do remember this trailer. I wasn't familiar with the graphic novel it was based on at all, but the trailer is surprisingly good. I feel like they worked really hard to find 2 minutes worth of solid scenes to put into this trailer, and it hooked me. I was interested in it, but I just mentioned Vengeance was in theaters for about 2 weeks, and then it got taken out. That was by design. It was a very limited release, probably for like awards consideration, just to put it on the map. But The Kitchen was not meant to be a limited release. But The Kitchen literally was in theaters for about 3 weeks, and then it was gone. But by the time the review started coming out, I thought, I don't need to see that right now. I can wait. Maybe one day I'll have a podcast where I can talk about it, because
good foresight.
Now, I was very intrigued by it. I like the cast. I like the cast a lot. We already gave Melissa McCarthy some praise and some props on the Happy Time Murders episode. Go back and listen to that one. Elisabeth Moss, truly one of the great dramatic actors of her generation. She's proven time and again she's got the chops. Tiffany Haddish, I was curious about. I like her as a comic actor. I was interested to see how she would do in a more dramatic role, and we eventually got that with The Card Counter as well, which I saw actually before I saw this movie.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it, I'm not sure she's got dramatic chops.
I have to agree with you. The Card Counter was better written, and so you could play off her slight flatness as, okay, well, that's who this person was in this Card Counter world, was like maybe not as sharp and incisive and emotionally compelling a person in real life. This movie, the writing was so much worse that she's just trying to pull off these lines, which are super hard. And to be very fair to her, when the scenes are written and edited the way they are in this movie, it's really hard to pull off. They have turns of emotion that just come out of nowhere and make no sense. These characters have these big responses based on almost nothing, because a lot of the motivation and detail in this movie seems to be missing. So it's really hard. But yeah, she didn't pull it off. To me, only Elisabeth Moss Moss could stay afloat of the lead characters. And then we'll talk about two of the side characters who brought a lot of oomph to it. We still don't know if they're super successful, but the mom and the mafioso at least brought some life to the movie.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop you right there. I don't know about the like. I love the actor in question, but I think she's bad in this movie. Sorry to say, Moss does okay, but there are some lines even she can't salvage.
That's
and
true.
I think Melissa McCarthy's proved to be an effective dramatic actress as well. But there's no saving these lines. This is a badly written movie.
Yeah.
I think we can get that out of the way right now. They're working with nothing good. You can elevate a movie to some degree, but if the script is this bad, you're not going to make a good movie out of nothing.
Which is a shame. Just like you were talking about BJ Novak being a seasoned writer making directorial debut, that's the case with this movie. Andrea Berloff had this great track record, Oscar nomination.
Yeah.
And then they gave her this movie and she went from just writing it to directing it as well. And you'll tell us a little bit of the story, but you got to think something happened to sabotage her because it really just falls apart in all these ways.
And the graphic novel was well received. Sometimes that can be a gift and a curse working from a source material that's beloved because you're scared to change some things that maybe don't translate as well to the screen as they work on the page. But they didn't have that problem. They were fine changing huge plot points from book to screen. So it's not like they were beholden to the source material to that same extent. They were clearly able to identify things they needed to change to make it more effective as a movie. I didn't go back and read the graphic novel, but I read a synopsis, I read reviews of it. I think while making those big changes, they were trying to make it work for the screen, but they made it not work at all as a story. They've kind of corrupted the message of the comic book to such a degree that you're left thinking like, what is this movie trying to say? What's the point? I think we'll come to find out there really isn't one. They had a half-baked idea and they just never figured out what are we trying to convey here? Like, what do we want people to walk away and think the kitchen was about?
The movie flip-flops back and forth from which you could say is a flip in tone or in how it handles these scenes, right? It's a mafia crime movie. The three heroes are women who take over and become tough mob bosses. So there's always going to be that tension of, okay, what's good? What's bad? What are they doing? How do we judge what they're doing? And the movie just really feels lost in trying to decide how it feels or even what it wants to show us, because it shows us an insanely cartooned up, happy version of being a mobster. And then it shows us some really sick, twisted shit and some really unjustified stuff. It's just all over the place.
Yeah, this movie has a wild tone problem, presenting certain parts of organized crime as almost family friendly and then just horrendously violent in every way you can imagine the word violent to mean, way certain things go down. And we can't really talk around it anymore. So let me just get into the making of this movie so we can really start nailing down specific plot points we want to expand on, because there's a lot we need to get into here.
Yeah, let's hear how this thing happened.
Okay. In December of 2015, DC Comics imprint Vertigo, aimed at more mature audiences, released a miniseries written by Ollie Masters and drawn by Ming Doyle called The Kitchen, about three wives of incarcerated Irish mob members who take over the criminal enterprise in their neighborhood, Hell's Kitchen, in the 1970s. The series was a hit, and DC, who already had Todd Phillips' R-rated Joker movie in production, greenlit a movie based on the comic. Andrea Berloff, who had written some well-received scripts like World Trade Center and Straight Outta Compton, was commissioned to write the script but impressed executives at New Line Cinema and was hired to direct the movie as well in what would be her directorial debut.
From Compton to Hell's Kitchen, she's your friendly neighborhood filmmaker.
Given a sizable $38 million budget, Berloff went about casting her movie, getting Melissa McCarthy, Tiffany Haddish, and Elisabeth Moss to play the three leads and rounding out the supporting parts with reliable character actors like Common, Margo Martindale, and Bill Camp. Domhnall Gleeson and James Badge Dale were added in key roles in April of 2018, and production began a month later with filming taking place in various locations throughout New York City.
Some were hellish, others more kitcheny.
Filming wrapped in September of 2018 and a release date of August 9th, 2019 was set. The movie was released and was absolutely savaged by critics, currently sitting at 23% on Rotten Tomatoes.
The Kitchen isn't popular on Rotten Tomatoes, but to be fair, Rotten Tomatoes are not popular in the kitchen.
Audiences largely ignored it as it was predicted to make a modest $9 to $14 million its opening weekend and made about half that, earning just $5.5 million and opening in 7th place. It would drop sharply from there, disappearing from most theaters after only a few weeks, and 2 months later, Vertigo Comics folded. Coincidence? Probably, but still. This is now a largely forgotten movie, but it's recent enough that we hope some of you see this episode and go, oh yeah, I remember that.
hit us up. Let us know if you know what we're talking about.
It's not a good movie, and it may have caused the downfall of Vertigo Comics, a DC imprint that released several great books. 100 Bullets, one of my favorite comic series of all times.
Wow.
Now lost forever. No, you can still buy them. They're just released under DC's more like mature label now. But still, I think that's a funny angle to take, that this movie caused the folding of Vertigo Comics.
The shit rolled upstream and killed the comic it was based on when no one had problems with that, right? That was well received.
Let's be honest, though. Any piece of media where women do something that men have done before, there's gonna be weird dudes on the internet like, this is bullshit.
That's true.
We saw it with Ghostbusters. I'm sure there was some backlash like that to the movie. And to be clear, that is not the problem we have with this movie.
No, not at all. And the movie sidesteps that main internet ugliness in that it's not recasting an existing story where it's doing a gender swap. This is a story about some women who start out in traditional roles in their time and place and neighborhood and figure out that they have to take themselves into new territory, which is, it's a great idea. That's why we said going into this, you hear the premise, you see the trailer, you're like, oh, this could be really cool. And it just doesn't execute.
And to be clear, the Tiffany Haddish role in the comic book, there was no female African-American character amongst the main cast. So they did swap that, but I think that's a smart swap and I think it could work. It's just the movie doesn't know what to do with it. Maybe if you had somebody more like Viola Davis in this movie, or even like a Michelle Rodriguez, and the husbands were played by actors with a little more weight, like John Bernthal or Liam Neeson. Oh, yeah, I'm just describing the movie Widows, which came out a year before this one and was much better. Yeah, if you guys like the concept of this movie, but are scared off by our review of it, just go watch Widows. It's way better.
I'm going to do that. Why didn't you let me do that?
Because Widows made money. Because it was good.
Dang it. The curse of the show, man.
Well, now I got to double check myself that it actually did make money. Oh my God. Widows kind of bombed.
Should we stop the recording right here and just start over?
Yeah, can we just stop? All right, I got to rewatch it though. It's been a while. No, I'm adding Widows to the schedule though. It made $76 million on a $42 million budget. And the rule of thumb is you need about 2.5 times your budget for a major theatrical release to make money. So it definitely was at least a disappointment. Cool. We can talk about Widows in the future.
A little bookend for this episode somewhere long down the road.
It's a neo-noir heist thriller directed by Steve McQueen. Say no more, fan.
Cool.
This movie, by the way, not any of those things. I don't even know what genre you would put this movie in. It's not really a thriller.
It's a crime movie. It's a mob movie.
Just a crime movie? Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm very unenthusiastic about this movie. And I was bummed because I was like, maybe the critics got this one wrong.
Yeah.
The actors are so winning. The concept is cool. It's a subject I mentioned at the end of last episode that I'm very interested in. One of my earliest memories of reading for pleasure that wasn't a Dean Koontz or Stephen King book was reading the book The Westies, the book by T.J. English published in 1990, telling the true story of the Hell's Kitchen Irish mob. A lot of it was based on research done by talking to Mickey Featherstone, who was one of the enforcers of the Irish mob, one of the heads in Hell's Kitchen. There's a lot of people disputing whether or not what was told in that book was accurate, because that's what always happens with crime nonfiction books. But it enraptured me, the stories of violence and fast money and running from the cops and all that, because, you know, I was like 12 years old at the time or whatever, and that's what you're into as a young boy.
Sure.
But I was like, man, they never really made a good movie about this. Don Winslow, writer of books that we've enjoyed in the past, kind of dealt with that similar territory in some of his books. But I was like, there's never really been a great movie made about the New York Irish mob. Of course, there's The Departed, if you want to talk about the Boston Irish mob.
Right.
But this was like ripe territory for a great movie, and they fumbled the bag. They would have had me in there.
And you'll point out there's at least one set of details that seems to come from that particular story of that mob assassin. I have to think that stuff came through the comic, although that's just a speculation because we haven't read it. But that feels like something that was a cool key scene in the comic that made it to the movie. But that's my main problem with this writer-director is it feels like she didn't do her research. It feels like she wrote the movie based on the story beats that she wanted to happen, but it really lacks a lot of depth. And maybe that's a problem with comic adaptations, right? Like Francis Ford Coppola didn't have to make up all that much shit because Mario Puzo put a lot in the novel of The Godfather, right? There's plenty of source material and all these things that feel really real, like, oh, this is how mob stuff happens. And this movie, you learn one thing about how to dissect a corpse, and everything else feels like really rough draft outlines. Like, how do you run a protection racket? Well, you walk on the street and you point a gun at a person and they give you an envelope full of money. And that doesn't feel real. That doesn't feel cool. We didn't learn anything. We didn't get immersed in this world.
I mean, Mario Puzo grew up in Little Italy and knew a lot of these guys personally, which is why he was able to give this real detailed overview of how the mafia more or less worked at the time. In reading about Andrea Berloff, she did not seem to have a background where she'd be familiar with the Hell's Kitchen Irish mob. She was born pretty much at the tail end of their heyday, for one thing.
Okay.
So, and I'm not saying you need to be entrenched in a lifestyle to write about it effectively, but like you said, then you have to make it up elsewhere by doing your research.
You have to do a lot of work. When you're starting with a comic book that is just naturally by that medium is much shorter. There's just not that many words and not that many images in a graphic novel, even a nice lengthy one compared to what goes into a regular novel. There's a lot of work to do, but there's no reason she couldn't do it. She's a white woman who wrote the script for Straight Outta Compton. She's proven that she can immerse herself in a world that's not her world and do a good job with it. It's just that this one, it just didn't happen somehow.
Also, comic books are just, they're heightened. Their reality is not ours. We don't look at it expecting it to mirror our world. So when it takes big swings, even if they don't always land, we tend to be a little more forgiving, I think. Whereas when you're seeing humans on screen, ostensibly in the real world, you have less tolerance for that. You want them to behave like people do. And you want the things that happen to have consequences that are consistent with what we understand the real world to be. And there's just none of that in this. It is literally a fairy tale.
Yeah.
So you want to get into the first section of the movie so we can start specifically complaining about things?
Yeah, let's get our hands dirty in the kitchen.
All right.
So it's 1978 in New York City, and the Irish mob controls the neighborhood called Hell's Kitchen. One night, 3 of those mobsters get arrested by the FBI, and they're sent to jail for 3 years, leaving their wives and families behind. Another mobster named Little Jackie takes over and tells the women that collections are down, so they'll have to make do with the meager allowance of money he gives them. So the 3 wives, Kathy, played by Melissa McCarthy, Ruby, played by Tiffany Haddish, and Claire, played by Elisabeth Moss, decide to take matters into their own hands. They recruit a couple sympathetic tough guys and start making their own collections from local businesses.
The first section of this movie, if they had chapter titles, it could just be Terrible Husbands.
Oh, yeah.
These husbands are terrible. 2/3 of them are almost comically evil to the point where it's implausible that anyone ever married them in the first place.
Right. They're snarling on the screen. It's awful. Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, they're foaming at the mouth. James Badge Dale is an actor I like quite a bit. He's on a show, Hightown, that's on Stars. Really good show about the opioid epidemic on Cape Cod.
Oh, interesting.
And he was in The Empty Man, which I'm very excited to talk about this coming Blasttober. Great little horror thriller from the last few years. He's given nothing to do in this movie except just play literal mustache twirling villain because he has a mustache.
He's got the mustache. It's a very 70s tough guy mustache.
He's got a little bit of a more interesting arc here because he is married to the Tiffany Haddish character, and there's a lot made about the fact that she's a black woman in Hell's Kitchen in the 1970s. Nobody wants her there. Nobody wants her around. And you're like, he must have really loved her to clearly put himself through whatever ostracization must have happened when he courted and married her. But we get none of that. There's no conflicted feelings between the two of them. They just hate each other from the moment this movie starts. And it could have been a little more interesting to have them be in like a semi-loving marriage in the beginning because their relationship was clearly born out of some animosity. But that's an interesting thread that just never gets pulled. They hate each other immediately and they just get worse from there.
Things are nasty in that house because the mother-in-law lives with them too, and she hates the wife because she's even more racist than the husband is. It's all caricature, but like thinking about it, like you said, we're talking about 3 different stories here, 3 relationships. If there was just one lady in this movie at the center of it, you could spend that time and figure out how did they get there? What's up with this guy? What does he really feel about her? But there's no time, so everyone is just a caricature.
And then there's, we already mentioned Jeremy Bobb playing Rob Wall. She's married to Elisabeth Moss's character, Claire. There's not much to say about him. He is literally the boogeyman. He's just a monster. There's no redeeming qualities. And then there's Brian Darcy James playing Jimmy Brennan, who's married to Melissa McCarthy's character, Kathy. And he actually seems like a semi-decent guy and a good dad, which begs the question, like, why the fuck are these 3 guys friends and criminal associates? I don't buy them as a crew.
They try to play some of that tension. So there's an opening scene where the guys have to get together to try to do this heist, which is actually just a liquor store stick up.
They talk about like they're breaking into the bank from Heat. They just walk into a store with 3 guns and point it at a guy's face. Like one last big score. No, man, you're going to get like $80.
We need this. We're going to get into the loan business, and this is going to be the stake that we need to get started. Wait, you're just walking into a liquor store with ski masks on. But anyway, in that scene, they spend a little time setting up like the tension between Kevin's a dick and Jimmy's like, okay, fuck it. I guess I got to do this because this is my mob and I got to be loyal. But then that stuff all evaporates after that.
They start a lot of interesting stories and then just forget about them as the movie goes on, where they'll do this thing that I fucking hate, which I know you noticed too. When they realize they've left something hanging, they'll just throw a quick 15-second scene in. That's a conversation between 2 characters to be like, oh, remember that thing? This is what happened.
Yeah.
And then the guy's like, okay, cool. And then they just move on to the next scene.
There's a lot of really disjointed editing. You can't quite tell if the scenes were longer or if they actually just wrote in a scene that just had one character who popped up and said, I need to say this right now.
Yeah.
And they shout it out.
Yeah, it'll be like two people talking on the street, and then the third character will pull up in their car, just be like, by the way. And you're like, wait, what the fuck is that guy? How does he even know what they're talking about? He just pulled up. He's been there for 5 seconds. Were they shouting across the street? I don't get it. So we briefly mentioned her, character actress extraordinaire, Margo Martindale, Justified crossover of the week, Mags Bennett from season 2.
Justified crossover of the week.
Whoa.
She is playing Helen, the matriarch. You give her a little more credit for this role than I do in your notes. I thought she was pretty bad in this.
She's chewing the scenery, but she brought some fire. The lines are bad. So yeah, my little example was like when you first start to realize who she is, it's after the men go to jail.
They're like all gathered at the bar to drink in their honor while they're in jail.
Right. So it's a kind of good way to see that because you see the dynamic. The 3 wives are at one end of the bar and the rest of the mobsters and Helen, the mother-in-law, are at their own table. They're laughing it up and the wives are kind of miserable. And you get this fun sense of the tension between this whole crew of people that are forced to live together. You can sense this animosity. And then it ends. Helen gets up abruptly to leave the bar. She walks up to the 3 wives and she just says, you fucking twats. Where the fuck did that come from? What was that? And what was that supposed to mean?
Such a strange line. I have it in my notes. The problem for me with Helen, and I hate to keep bringing up Justified, but Margo Martindale has played 2 really well-received characters on TV shows from the past, like 15 years. She was Mags Bennett on Justified, and she played a KGB asset in The Americans.
Oh, okay.
And both kind of greet you with a smile and then gradually reveal how monstrous and evil they are. And she's really good at playing that kind of fake generosity and warmth.
Okay.
And then like slowly unraveling till it's too late and you're already in her clutches. But
Right.
here, when your first big scene is calling these 3 women fucking twats, where do you go from there? There's no character development to be had here.
She's a walking nasty gram. She is just snarling at all times.
And she's speaking in this gravelly, deep voice. And I don't know, it's not an interesting character.
Okay,
No.
I'm with you. I don't like her anymore.
All right, finally. Like the same way we ask, why are these 3 guys friends and a crew? I have to wonder the same thing about these 3 women. There's lots of lines about how they're friends and love each other, but then their dynamic didn't work for me. So they just know Claire has been getting the shit kicked out of her for years and years. And all these women who are such self-starters that they'll start a criminal enterprise at the first sign of not making rent one month. Never think to like try to get her out of the situation. Ruby says to her at one point, besides getting hit, what other skills do you have? It's like, why would you be friends with this person?
That was a really dicky thing to say. They don't have much chemistry, the 3 of them. So they're forced to talk each other through why they're hanging out. Because like you said, it's not obvious. There's this funny dynamic in the first act. Claire, and we'll keep coming back to this, is unfortunately a punching bag. She has an abusive husband. And then the movie goes on to just let any number of, I lost count of how many other people abuse Claire while the others skate through. Kathy and Ruby are going around and they're acting like McKinsey consultants in the mob world, collecting data and like shopkeepers. How are you satisfied with your mafia, your mob
With your protection
racket?
services.
Yeah, they're like, my protection sucks. And then they get back together and they talk each other through their assessments. Well, you know, we could do it better than these weak mobsters. And then meanwhile, Claire in this same first act is just bouncing around, getting beaten on, and it's pretty rough.
People she just meets on the street. She even remarks upon it. She's like, everyone just beats the shit out of me. Like that guy saw me and knew I was a victim.
That's true. She says it.
But it keeps happening until there is a turn at one point, but then we have to get into that in the next section because is that better? I don't know. I will say her and Domnhall Gleeson are probably the only 2 people in the movie that have any kind of chemistry with each other.
Yeah, that's fun. And their relationship blossoms in the next act. Let me ask this. I was going to say Domhnall Gleeson.
I have no fucking idea. Are you kidding me? I'll just call him Dom Gleeson from now on.
Yeah, let's go with Dom.
Dom, good old Dom. The son of Brendan Gleeson.
Yeah.
One of my favorite actors.
He's very likable.
So let's get into that because your statement about Kathy and Ruby and the way they treat crime in the neighborhood is frankly hilarious to me. And the movie seems to posit that crime's good as long as nice people are doing it. Like it was just mean guys doing it before and they didn't really care about their customers, but it's okay to extort people out of their money as long as you help them out when somebody does graffiti on their wall or some kid comes in and shoplifts. You're like, oh, we'll get them for you. Don't worry. And then they pay you $800 a week for nothing. Like the movie has this very naive view, I think, of organized crime in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it does, but just in this first act, because it's going to flip on us later. But here you're like, wait, what do these people think crime is? They're in there like hanging out with these old restaurant owners and just palling around with them. And the Melissa McCarthy character's like, I saw the graffiti on your wall. Let me send my kids by to help paint that over for you. Like, they're just doing helping hand services. And by the way, you need to empty your register. Instead of paying your employees, you need to give us an envelope of cash every week. And then they literally do a montage where they're walking around the neighborhood and the shopkeepers are looking, grinning ear to ear, and they're standing with their children shoulder to shoulder, and they're all smiling and handing over wads of protection money. I was like, holy shit, is that real? It's like into Walk Hard territory of parodying itself for a moment.
They're even pimping. Like they're working hookers.
They threaten some pimps and then they're like, yeah, you work for us now, ladies.
Like, don't worry, we're not going to beat you up unless you don't give us our money, in which case we will. What's the message here? They're even more brutal in some ways because they're more ambitious. They end up expanding their reach more into like less receptive communities, let's say, who then they have to resort to like extreme violence to get them to hand over the money. But that's for section 2, so we can hold on to it. Was there anything else that we needed to get to in this area?
No, let's see if we can plow forward.
All right. When interim Irish mob boss Little Jackie finds out the women are horning in on his action, he beats up their friendly thugs and attacks Claire in an alley. But Claire is saved by the arrival of Gabriel, played by Dom Gleeson, an old mob friend who had been in hiding. Gabriel kills Little Jackie and proceeds to become the women's new enforcer, schooling them in the ways of murder and sparking a romance with Claire. The ladies begin to expand their power, intimidating some nearby Jewish landowners and entering into an arrangement with a powerful Brooklyn mob boss named Alfonso Coretti, played by Italian heartthrob Bill Camp, in order to gain more power over their territory. The women's control over the Irish mob is almost complete, except for Ruby's mother-in-law, an old-time mob wife who is a source of conflict. So Ruby just pushes her down some fucking stairs and kills her. Absolutely insane.
That was one of the most insane scenes, but maybe we should work our way up to it.
Yeah, we got to take it as it comes. So this section starts with somebody attempting to rape Claire because beating her up has not been enough for the rest of the movie. So Little Jackie, who is presented as a real piece of shit, and also our second Justified crossover of the week, played by Mike Watford.
Justified crossover of the week.
Oh, shit.
Who played a prison escapee on a first season episode of Justified named Price.
Wow.
But he gets the drop on Claire as they're gaining power and he's got a problem with it. He could have just fucking shot her. And then we didn't know Gabriel was waiting in the wings. He would have shot Jackie, but still he would have achieved his goal. But no, he has to grab her around the waist and try to drag her into an alley to rape her. And he dies for it. But then what is the movie trying to say with Gabriel? What is the message of this character? Because Claire would have been dead if not for him. The movie's not really embracing it's like that women can, I don't really know how to approach that subject, but who saves their ass? It's Gabriel and Alfonso. Without these two powerful men, they would have been hamstrung and their enterprise would have been dead before it really got started.
Gabriel works a little better for me because he ends up playing a mentor role and he obviously plays a romantic role too. So it's not as weird for the hero to need to go on a journey and have to find a mentor who schools them in the ways of their new world that they're opening into. Coretti is more just like a Deus Ex Machina who pulls the levers when you need somebody with power to prevent bad things from happening. But yeah, I'm with you in that there's too much of that stuff. And the part where the women figure things out from their own and build this business, as they keep referring to, we worked so hard, we built up our mob business.
It seems like it took them like a month.
Yeah, and it all feels phony. It's all so cheesily done, so it doesn't feel meaningful when they tell you that they built a business.
And you're not scared about them losing it because you didn't really see them build. They're saying words, but there's nothing on the screen that really reinforces it.
It's just pictures of them, montages of them over and over, taking out envelopes full of cash. And like, is that all the business is? Like, if that's all it was, I'm going into the mob business. I'm going to walk around New York and just pick up envelopes of cash.
They've got the mob in LA, or they used to. Their mob's not really many places anymore at all.
Yeah, but no one walks in LA. I like New York for the walkability. I can get a lot of cash in a short time.
Gabriel is, not to keep harping on that book, The Westies, that probably none of our listeners have ever read. Mm-hmm. He seems to be a one-to-one comparison for the protagonist of The Westies, Mickey Featherstone, because they're both war veterans who clearly got kind of messed up in the head. Like they were in the mob, then they went to war and came back a little messed up, some PTSD going on. They become kind of muscle. The section where Gabriel teaches them how to break a body apart in a bathtub is directly ripped from the book, The Westies, especially the section about how you have to disembowel a torso before you throw it in the water, a little float because it fills up with air. I distinctly remember that from the book. And he gives that speech almost exactly in this portion of the movie. And it becomes, it's like a really dark comedy in those scenes because there's just blood spraying everywhere. It's not gory. You don't see anything really.
No, but it's painful nonetheless.
And you hear the sound, there's lots of sounds that are pretty disgusting. The way he's describing it, it sounds accurate. This is where the movie's like weird relationship with murder comes into play too, because sometimes murder is like a real tragic occurrence that you have to sit and think about for a while. And other times it's just funny.
I was not ready for this turn because I was just watching the shopkeeper and their kids hugging each other and smiling and giving money to the nice mob ladies. And now I'm like, this is too much. And I got why they were doing it, but they lingered on it so long. He gives a long speech and he gives you quite a details as he's taking this body apart like a chicken. It was rough. And I was just like, that was just bad judgment to give us so much of that. You could have given us a version of that scene that was 1/3 the length and still got the point across that, oh, now we're getting into the gross stuff.
I think they wanted to dwell on it to show you Claire getting an affinity for it because Claire, spoiler alert, she sure loves killing.
She loves this stuff.
Chopping up bodies. She basically turns into a serial killer. Like she might have been the son of Sam for all we know because she is just shooting people and drowning them, but she doesn't drown them. She drops them in the river. And I think if the movie was smarter, that could have been a interesting angle to go on about cycles of abuse. This person's been a punching bag her entire life and now she has some power. Like, what is she going to do with it? But the movie glorifies her new behavior and attitude. The movie's not interested in interrogating itself about how are we supposed to feel about Claire now? Sure, she's killing bad people, but isn't she just reinforcing the same cycles of violence that she was victim to her whole life?
It spends a lot of time with the actual execution, forgive the pun, of these moments. And there's a lot of them. She's got a lot of people. As soon as she realizes she likes killing, she's got a long list.
She's like Rocco from the Boondock scene.
She is, yeah. She's telling Gabriel, I've got to do more of this stuff. And yeah, it's mostly focused on watching her do the crimes and not on what are we supposed to make out of this. There was like a homeless guy, the homeless guy who you said sensed her weakness and pushed her down when she caught him trying to steal from the church. She just tracks him down on the street and executes him with a bullet to the back of the head.
Yeah.
I'm like, is that supposed to be justice? Are we supposed to be on board with that? Or are we supposed to see that she's going too far already? And then I only got this on the second watch. I think they kill one of the young Irish mobsters who hadn't done anything grotesque to her. Some of the other characters had, but there was a scene where the other mobsters intimidate the three ladies in the bar and he picks up her drink off the table. And so she killed him for that.
Oh yeah, when he's walking out, he just picks up her whiskey or whatever.
Yeah, it's the young kid with the short haircut. And then they show his face in the bathtub. He's dead. He's been executed with a bullet to the brain.
Jesus. If stealing someone's drink is a murderable offense, there's going to be people out to kill me in every city I go to.
Watch out. If you see Claire, run the other way.
No, man, that's wild. I didn't realize they killed him. I know exactly the scene you're talking about, but
yeah I didn't pick up on it. And Gabriel goes, kid always had an attitude. Like, oh, he deserved it.
All right, so let's move on to this butcher shop scene that is just another one of these weird, out-of-place scenes that just kind of happen for nothing.
This was my perfect example of either bad writing or editing or both. We've established that there's this friction between Helen, the former matriarch, and the ladies who are taking over the business. And there's this scene that it just doesn't make any sense. Helen walks into this butcher shop, and then the door opens behind her, and the butcher kid sees that it's Kathy and Ruby. He runs out like, oh shit, this is the showdown. So they walk up to her, and they say, shut up. Is that the confrontation you were planning? One of them says, hi, Helen, and the other one says, shut up. So
it's so strange. Yeah, the movie does not know what to do with her for this long stretch.
Yeah, so Helen has to turn it on them, and she makes it a confrontation where she's now confronting them. She's saying, I ought to be the one who says how things go. And it's like, if Helen needed to confront the women about that, why did they confront her? Why did they chase her down so that she could confront them? Like, the whole thing is just totally mixed up. And then 2 seconds later, they go, no, you shouldn't be the one in charge. And then she goes, okay, we'll see when my son gets out of jail. And then they walk out.
It feels like a scene that they watched the first cut and they were like, Ruby pushing this lady down the stairs is not justified.
Oh.
We haven't seen her in 40 minutes. She's barely in the movie. She hasn't really been antagonizing them at all. She hasn't been giving them a hard time. Because it does seem like she's just kind of letting this all happen and maybe she's bitter about it, but she's not plotting behind the scenes as far as we could tell.
Yeah, she should have done something to them.
Right. There should have been an attempted hit that we knew came from her.
Yeah, something.
And then you could have Ruby invite her to dinner to smooth things over between the two of them and then push her down the stairs. Now we're kind of talking. Now I can see the narrative threads. But no, it seems like they went out of their way to find her, yell at her, and then push her down some stairs later. It's a very strange scene. We have to get to maybe our biggest problem with this movie.
The one that's inexcusable, because the rest of them are personal issues about the characters being unmotivated or goofy and dumb. It goes into some offensive territory in this section.
Our three heroes are deeply, deeply anti-Semitic in some really rough scenes. They strong arm these Jewish businessmen that are trying to put up some buildings near, not even in Hell's Kitchen, just near it.
I think it's the next neighborhood over.
And they want them to use their union crews to build them. And they're like, no, thank you. We will build our buildings the way we want. So they fucking kill one of them. They dump a bunch of raw meat outside another one's business. And it's hard to explain how uncomfortable these scenes are without reciting the dialogue. But like Ruby, you reminded me, she very dismissively says L'chaim as she's leaving. Like they're not just disliking these guys because they're business rivals. They're going out of their way to point out that they don't like them because they're Jewish.
It's real weird because the thing that stood out to me is that a lot of other places in this movie, you get that Hollywood style justification. Claire is clearly overmotivated and overjustified to kill people because she's so brutally abused throughout her life. Now the ladies have been doing all this happy, good time protection racket in their neighborhood. And they're like, you know what? We need to do some nastier business. So let's go to the next neighborhood, meet this Jewish businessman. And there's no hint, there's no justification that this guy is corrupt or evil. He's very reasonable with them. There's no allusions to you're in this bad business or you treat women badly or you do anything wrong. The movie forgets to just give any reason.
He's not working with a union group.
Right. That's his worst sin. And it's like, oh, that leaves you wondering, so why does he deserve this treatment? And you're like, oh my God, I hope it's not because he's so visibly Jewish, but like, I can't figure out why else. And the dumping the raw meat in front of his jewelry shop to disgust him, it felt like, oh, that's really twisted if that's...
It's like hate crime-ish if it's pork in there. Like,
yeah.
And they also like kind of dismiss his religion with his reasoning that he can't be in the room alone with them because they're adult women, so he has to have a woman in the room with him. Mm-hmm. They kind of belittle him for that too, in a sense. They
just casually, yeah, they throw that in.
Dismissive about it, which sure, I think lots of religions have customs I don't necessarily understand, but it's not my job to understand them. Like, yeah. I'm also not the protagonist in this movie who you're supposed to be rooting for.
And then, like you said, one of the guys, this group of jewelers who own this property, one of them's like, they're just harassing us. We don't have to accept their demands. And so they murder him. They leave him dead, shot through the head on the steps of his home. And they're so smug and like, yeah, we did a cool thing. And just, all that would be fine if the movie grappled with that. If the idea was that these women went into the mob business and then they became twisted. But it doesn't tell you that. It just slides this in and then they continue to try to be sympathetic family people doing all this goody stuff at the same time. So it's really jarring.
Kathy, at least, is presented as a hero throughout. Ruby has twists and turns to her character. Her motivations are a little more complicated. And Claire is just off the deep end for most of this. But like Kathy is always presented as paragon of virtue. She just wants to provide a good life for her family. But then they also toss in random lines about, oh, I don't want that gold bracelet. I have too many just like it. So what are they really just trying to survive? Because it doesn't seem like they're just trying to survive now. It seems like they're interested in more and more.
I forgot. They burglarized that guy's store. The same guy who they did the hate crime on. They come back that night, break into his jewelry store and bring home sacks of jewelry. And then they're just like, they're draped in all this jewelry in the next scene, like just enjoying the hell out of it.
They didn't spread it throughout the neighborhood. They didn't sell it. They're just wearing a comically large amount of jewelry.
It's really twisted.
It's like what a child would do if they robbed the jewelry store. Put it all on at once. It's so strange. But that line also too, it's like, why throw that line in about I have too many bracelets just like that one now? Because this movie, parts of it make me feel like it's trying to say something about the excesses of crime and, you know, trying to give us like the Scarface treatment where your ambition will ultimately bring you down. But then I think in the end, what the movie's saying is Scarface would have been okay if it was if it was these nice ladies from Manhattan. It wouldn't have been so bad.
It ends up kind of saying that, even if that's not what it thinks it's saying, but it's not a great message.
No, if they were trying to give out some deeper meaning behind their greed being their downfall, it never really comes to fruition.
No, they toss out these little things and then they don't fill in any of the blanks, so you can't take anything away from it.
Let's talk about famous Italian-American stalwart Bill Camp.
Yeah.
Alfonso Coretti. Why is he dressed like a bellhop? Is he wearing white gloves? Am I misremembering that? He's dressed like he's going to the fucking opera in every scene.
He doesn't look very Italian, so they had to give him some fancy Italian duds to sell who he's supposed to be.
He doesn't look Italian with the fancy duds. He looks like the fucking maitre d' at an Italian restaurant in Wisconsin.
He's quite a good actor, though.
I love Bill Camp. Yeah, don't get me wrong. He's just miscast.
He's miscast, but at the same time, you go, oh, thank goodness they had somebody good here because, again, the lines and the scenes are pretty rough. And so you're like, okay, at least we can lean on him for a second. He can get us through this sequence with his sheer acting skill.
He makes no attempt at an Italian-American accent. He doesn't try to do a Brooklyn accent at all. And you know what? That's fine.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to. I did find it weird that the girls are driving over the bridge into Brooklyn and they're looking at it like they're coming into the big city now. Like, you're from Midtown Manhattan. Why are you doughy-eyed at Brooklyn? You know what I'm talking? Like, they look like tourists going over the bridge. I think Claire has her head out the window like fucking golden retriever at one point, just like taking it all in.
Some cheery music playing. We're gonna make it in the big city.
But then, yeah, Bill Camp is a good actor. He's doing better with this material, but this material sucks because if this guy is as big and powerful as the script wants us to think he is, he doesn't need them at all. Like, why is he being so kind to them? Are they like bringing in that much money where it would really ruffle the feathers of the Italian mob? I know the real Irish mob in Hell's Kitchen, they were moneymakers, but the three guys that they replaced and little Jackie, they all seem like a bunch of low-level dipshits.
Yeah, they were knocking over liquor stores. They weren't big time. And yet that's the whole shebang. Like, that's the whole Westies gang as far as we can tell from this movie.
I don't know. It just, there's something off about the scale of their enterprise versus the racket they took over. And I understand that the movie shows them trying to expand, but none of that expansion really goes all that smoothly. So I can't imagine that they're raking in big money from it right away.
No, so you're right. Bill Camp has to do a lot of work to sell us on why he's being nice to them because the lines don't quite explain it. And he's just, I hope the audience is buying this. And he not only gives them respect, but then he like grants them power over this huge swath of Manhattan. They make a deal with them and like, yeah, we're not satisfied with Hell's Kitchen. Give us all of Midtown. And he's like, okay, you deserve it. And I'm like, oh, are you sure?
Why do they deserve it? But when they're leaving that initial meeting with him, he looks at them and he's like, you girls kill me. And I was like, oh, they're going to have a war with him and they're going to kill him. And it's going to be like, it's like Chekhov's line. But no, it never circles back. I was like, that's a wasted opportunity right there.
It's too bad.
Also, did you catch the little reference to Trump?
I was wondering, I didn't look it up, but like that's actually Bill Camp's best line in the movie. I can't recreate it and do it justice, but maybe you can explain what it is.
So he's talking to them about a convention center that they're planning. That would end up being the Javits Center, which is still, a huge convention center in Manhattan. And Coretti mentioned some millionaire's kid, a little shit for brains, finally signed it over, sold the option on a rail yard so that they could build it. And that was kind of how the deal went down. It was Donald Trump that was involved. So I was like, oh, hey, little piece of history there.
Yeah, that was fun. And even not knowing that was the truth behind it, you could kind of tell that was a reference to something. And Bill Camp gives this look off to the side when he drops that line. I noticed on the second reading, I'm like, yeah, he's really investing a lot in that little.
He's reveling in it.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, Bill Camp, good. And then the actual scene happens where Ruby pushes Helen down the stairs, which we alluded to. It is so abrupt. They're walking down the street. And first of all, Helen is so impatient to be like, what restaurant are we going to? How far away is it? They've been walking for like a block as far as we could tell. And Tiffany Haddish is just, oh, it's right up there. And then like 10 seconds later, she's like, which restaurant is it? It's like, lady, that was 3 townhouses ago. You just asked. Like, why are you so fucking impatient? And then we get to it. And of course, the restaurant is closed. We go, oh no, must be Monday. And then Ruby just pushes her down the stairs in a pretty hilarious fashion.
Yeah, I did not expect her to be dead. But to let you know that she is dead, the camera swings over and shows her with her neck kind of craned around in a dead looking kind of a way. It got a laugh out of me. I don't think it was supposed to be funny.
It was like 5 steps.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's a pretty big risk to be like, she's definitely going to die if I push her down these 5 steps.
Was she prepared to jump down after her and stab her if she was still fine at the bottom of the stairs?
I feel like there's an 80% chance she's going to survive that fall. You just got very lucky with the way she landed.
And there's this really dopey exchange of insults between the two of them. Helen's like, you dumb idiot, the restaurant's closed. And then Tiffany Haddish character comes back and says, you dumb idiot, it's Monday, all restaurants are closed, and kills her. And it's like, what? Just the language of it was like, they didn't even give her a clever, crafty line. They just called each other both dumb idiots.
That was actually a law for many years. You weren't allowed to eat out on Mondays.
Oh, really?
All the restaurants were closed. No, it's completely made up. But yeah, it is the most common day for restaurants to be closed. And what if Helen was like, what are you talking about? It's Monday. No, I'm not going out to dinner with you, stupid. The restaurant's closed. I know Google Maps wasn't a thing, but like she might have just known it from being in the neighborhood. And then what is your plan?
Wasn't well thought out. She got lucky.
Okay. You ready to take us home? Final act?
Yeah. After some time, the 3 husbands get out of jail and difficulties ensue. Claire's abusive husband attacks her, so she shoots him dead. Then the Italian mafioso Coretti tells the ladies that their own people have put out hits on them, so they turn the tables and they hire the mafia to kill the Irish mobsters instead. But Kathy insists they spare her husband Jimmy and also a nice young man named Colin. This turns out badly because shortly afterward, Colin manages to assassinate Claire. Gabriel and Ruby are super pissed about that. Then Ruby reveals her big twist. She's been conspiring with her corrupt FBI agent lover this whole time, orchestrating the husband's arrest so that she could execute her rise to power. Meanwhile, Kathy's hubby Jimmy isn't happy with the new arrangement, so he tries to make a deal with Coretti to cut Kathy out of the mob business. But Coretti rats him out to Kathy, and she has her husband killed. Ruby and Gabriel then invite Kathy to a meeting where they plan to kill her. But Kathy has rallied the Irish neighborhood to her side, and they're forced to stand down. Kathy strikes a deal to allow Ruby to run Harlem while Kathy stays in charge as the big boss of Hell's Kitchen.
This is a very twisty last third of the movie, and it's where the movie truly goes off the rails, I think. I had to single out one of my least favorite lines of dialogue I've ever heard in a movie. The girls get together and they're panicked, talking about our husbands are getting out of jail soon. Or no, they're out already. Like, what are we going to do? And Claire says, in one of the most exposition-heavy lines of dialogue ever written, I haven't seen Rob, but I'm living with Gabriel, and I'm happy. Immediately there, I was like, she is marked for death. I assumed it would be Rob that killed her, but the movie still had some surprises up its sleeve, I guess.
It had a little twist, but yeah, that felt like she was reading from the outline. Like, they didn't do the script. They're like, okay, so where's Claire in this part of the movie? Well, she hasn't seen Rob, but she's living with Gabriel, and she's happy at this point. Okay, I'll go say that into the camera.
People don't talk like that, man. You're right. She's like reading the treatment. Yeah. Pet peeve alert. We need a new intro sound for John's pet peeves.
Oh, okay.
Pet peeve alert.
John's pet peeves.
They are doing a thing where they are talking to Coretti and his henchmen, and they're like, we heard it from this one guy. He's got an Irish last name. And they're cycling through different names. They're like, oh, it's something like Dodo or Dinkle. And they're like, Duffy. He's like, yeah, that's it, Duffy. Like, none of those fucking words they just said sounded anything like Duffy. How did you make that leap? I don't understand. Doyle maybe, but Dodo to Duffy are not similar at all.
I think they said doo-doo in there somewhere.
Doo-doo was definitely in there.
This guy's from New York. They're not talking to a stranger from another land who'd never heard an Irish name before. This is just like another New York guy.
Was he the one that was actually Greek? I thought that was a funny little aside.
I liked him.
It's like your little Italian henchman. He's like, I'm Greek. I just thought that was fun. But then the movie needed more lines that just weren't about moving the plot forward.
That's true.
In such a workmanlike manner. Like, it needed more flavor. And that was like a little flavor line that I enjoyed.
That's a great point. That was one of the only little flavor sprinkles in this whole movie.
Everything is about actions and the consequences for them. The movie's very plot heavy. So that's my pet peeve when movies do that, where they're trying to guess a name and they get it based on a word that sounds nothing like the actual name. It happens more than you think.
We're going to have to watch out for that.
More weird editing in this section. There's a quick scene of Kathy and her husband Jimmy having an argument because Kathy thinks hitmen are coming to kill her, because they are. They're just yelling at each other for like 20 seconds. And then it cuts to a rat and there's this bass heavy music and we spend 15 seconds following a rat running down an alley. One of the most bizarre editing choices I've ever seen.
I think that might have been an attempt, like we were just talking about, to insert some little flavor into the movie. That cut didn't have to do with the scene before, but it was just establishing this is how things are on the streets of Hell's Kitchen, sturdy and grimy, but very late in the movie to just decide to spend some time exploring the atmosphere.
And a close-up of a rat in a movie about the Irish mob is always going to draw unfavorable comparisons to The Departed. Why would you put that thought in somebody's head? First, you cast James Badge Dale, who had a key role in The Departed, and then you put this rat right in our face. You don't want to compare this movie to that one. I don't think The Departed's perfect, but it's the better movie of these two.
Yeah, this was just a random rat. This was not a meaningful rat. And like you said, that scene was really weird. It was a short little fight between Kathy and her husband. And even that didn't make sense. She's running around the house, closing up the blinds like, oh no, what if there's hitmen coming? And he grabs her and yells, stop it. What did that mean? Like she was being silly for trying not to get shot? I couldn't even figure out what they were arguing about. He's like, in this house, we don't overreact to hitmen.
Does he not believe people are out to get her? Because like he must have heard the rumblings around the neighborhood. People are definitely out to get them at this point.
His buddy Kevin ordered the hit, or he got Duffy to order the hit, but it was Kevin's business.
I think he left Jimmy out of it, but still, there's no way you're not going to hear rumblings. Coretti heard about it all the way in Brooklyn, that magical land.
Across the glorious bridge.
And then I did love this scene where Claire ends up killing Rob. Rob breaks into her house, tries to beat her up again. He hits her with a body blow, which is just really,
twice.
He swings
really
for the
rough.
fences with it.
Yeah.
And she just doubles over. You're like, fuck. But then she, of course, shoots him because, you know, she's a stone killer now. And then she takes him down to the river. This guy must have been like 270. He's a big dude. And she just drags him to the water and drops him down there. But then Kathy and Ruby show up there? What are they doing there? She didn't call them because she's shocked to see them.
At first you see Claire waiting in the water and the camera swings around and like Kathy's standing on the shore and you're like, what the fuck? What is she doing there? And she's just there to say, who was that? Was that Rob? Are we killing our husbands now? And then you're like, that was weird. Why is Kathy in Claire's scene here in this very intimate moment? How did she get down there? And just as you're thinking about that, car drives up. It's Ruby. She honks the horn. Get in, girls. We got more scenes to do. We can't stand around floating bodies down the river. We got to close blows up this movie.
Would you honk your horn at somebody who's like dumping a body in the river?
She may not have actually honked it, but it felt like she was so lighthearted. She's just, excuse me, we gotta go.
First of all, why would you be shocked and or annoyed at Claire for killing Rob, this person who has beat her within an inch of her life for as long as you've known him?
That's a good point.
Caused her to have a miscarriage. He's a monster. In about 10 minutes, Kathy's going to give a speech like, I loved her too. If you really loved her, wouldn't you be like, fuck yeah, you finally killed that guy who was going to kill you eventually if you let him?
Yeah.
Why are you mad at her?
Doesn't even make sense.
Clearly don't have a problem with murder. And also, I don't think they had Find My Friends yet on your cell phone because they didn't have cell phones yet. So I don't understand how all these people are finding each other.
No.
I remember trying to hang out with people in the 90s and it was difficult. You have to call their house, be like, we're going to meet at this place at this time, and just hope that they didn't forget because you didn't have a phone to call them. If they did, you'd be shit out of luck.
To be fair, at that point in her life, if you were looking for Claire, the smart money is go down to the place where she dumps dead bodies.
All right, she's not in her bathroom chopping up a body, so she's probably dumping it somewhere. Really bizarre choice here because Claire gets murdered. This character who we think is kind of going on this journey of empowerment, it might be misguided because she's become too remorseless a killing machine. It's no longer really about retribution at this point. She's just a killer. She gets shot in the head and killed. It's like, really? This is the arc you want to give this character?
And maybe that's the, live by the sword irony. Maybe that's actually one of the better choices the movie made, or it just didn't know how to deal with.
Gabriel gets off scot-free. He's killed way more people than Claire.
Oh, that's true.
And kind of walked her down this path to becoming a killer. I think him dying and her having to deal with that would have been a more, do I still want to live this life now? I've lost the one person that I really loved and who treated me well.
The guy I used to kill with. Now, was I into killing or was I just into him?
Was I just trying to save the relationship? Sometimes you get into a band because your significant other's into them. And then when you break up, you're like, I don't like this fucking band.
I've got all these knives and guns. These feel like his things.
Got to do a cleanse. I think killing Gabriel would have been a more interesting choice for Claire's character. I think killing her, you can't make her the victim of all this violence and the perpetrator of all this violence and then try to make her the live by the sword, die by the sword lightning rod.
It doesn't leave us with any real meaning we can take away. And it feels like they just wanted to get her off the board because they couldn't explain what the fuck was going on with her anyway.
She's like the sin eater for the group. She takes the brunt of the consequences of all their bad actions and they all get off scot-free. I wouldn't say I like the Claire character. I liked Elisabeth Moss's performance the most out of the main cast, but the movie definitely suffers when she's gone, especially because then Ruby's about to drop a big reveal on us that she's been working with the FBI. Not working with the FBI. She has a rogue FBI agent working for her. But then she disappears from the movie for a while. She's gone for 20 minutes, I think, and it just becomes the Kathy story.
Yeah, let's talk about what occupies Kathy's time.
I cannot fathom why she wants to live a life of crime with everything it's cost her. Her husband, who ends up being a jealous kind of piece of shit towards the end and misogynistic and chauvinistic in his own way because he can't stomach the idea of his wife being the breadwinner, but she fucking murders him for it. She gives him some speech about, oh, you brought my kids to Brooklyn.
We thought Brooklyn was a majestic, wonderful land, but Kathy had other ideas. She did not like bringing the kids there.
So she lets him get murdered with her kids in the other room. How are you going to explain that? They're not like toddlers. One of them might be an early teen and the other one might be 11. They're smart enough to know dad didn't come home.
Dad drove them to a piano store, dropped him off with a nice Italian lady who was Coretti's wife. And then mom showed up, took them home. It's like, no, dad's not coming home with us. It's like, okay, Kathy, are you sure you did the right thing here? I get it that Jimmy did something stupid. This whole scene, it's so muddled here.
Yeah.
It makes sense that she would turn her back on him if he betrayed her, if that was the point. He turned out to be a ruthless mobster too, and he was ready maybe to risk the kids, but more about he was going to double cross his wife. And she had to be a very tough Michael Corleone, like Michael Corleone, depending on what pronunciation.
Corleone, as the senator says in part 2.
I'm a Corleone guy. I'm not sure where I got that. But anyway, so Michael Corleone is the hard-ass gangster, right? That's the prototype. Okay, so we want this to be one of those moments where she's like, you betrayed me. I know it was you. I got to kill you, even though you're the father of my children. But it's not that. It's she, for a minute, pretends oh, it was not about the mob business. It's just that you did a very silly thing. You never take your children to a friendly mafia guy's
piano store.
Yeah, his piano store, which doesn't even make sense because he was clearly friendly. He was never going to hurt them. And we believe him when he says that. And we believe that she believes that. There's a very friendly wife character who helps cement that.
Annabelle Sciorra, great actress.
Yeah, cements that. The kids were actually not really in danger.
Also, these kids have been brought up around the mob their entire fucking lives. Her mother's side of the family was very involved in crime for her entire life, we're led to believe, from her father, who we haven't even mentioned, but comes into play in a big way in this final act. So these kids are not strangers to interacting with mob members.
Right,
their fucking dad was in the mob. Their mom's a mob.
So
why are you
all of a sudden
you're acting like these people are I don't get it. Yeah, I can't reconcile it.
And then the explanations change really fast. So I guess we can use that to transition to her father's insane change of heart, as you called it in the notes, because that's the next time we explain, what did she just do? Why did she kill her husband for the better of the kids? And then why does her dad now think that's cool?
So we got to give a little background before we dive into the scene. But her dad is this very old school Irish guy. He's very against anyone living a life of crime, which begs the question, why did you marry her mom? This guy's wife was in a crime family her entire life, and she doesn't seem to be like disapproving of it either. Her mom doesn't get a lot of lines in this, but we're led to understand all the crime comes from her side of the family. And the dad's all like, what are you doing? You're a piece of trash now. This is how you're raising your kids. You're going to be in the mob. You're going to be a big crime boss. You're garbage. I hate you. But then he's like, oh, you killed your husband, did you? That changes everything. Now I agree with what you're doing. You're actually good for the neighborhood.
They're sitting in the church side by side, and he goes out of his way to tell her that everything he stood for in the rest of the movie is over. He doesn't just understand, like, hey, that was tragic. I get it, honey. He goes out of his way to tell her, you did this for the kids? You know what? That's right. That's the right move. I would have done the same thing. He literally says it 3 ways in one sentence. That's the best thing. Like, you expect him to like keep rambling on. Oh, killing your husband? That was so good. I would have killed him for you. If you would have told me I love killing husbands, that's the thing to do. And then it's all
minor disagreement, kill him.
Done something stupid, forget to put the seatbelts on, kill him. You can't take the kids' lives that casually. You must kill their father at every opportunity. And it's like, it doesn't make any sense.
I have a theory about what the movie was trying to do here.
Okay, let's hear it.
So because the movie has set him up to be this paragon of virtue throughout the film, he's such a zealot about keeping your nose clean and never get involved with these people. The movie's trying to beat into our heads that like, this is a good and righteous man. And the movie knows, I think maybe this feels like one of those scenes where they showed the movie to somebody and you're like, what are you doing? She can't just kill her husband and drive home without him. They're like, we need a character to tell her and the audience that it was good what she did actually, and okay. Who do we know who's kind of been built up as like a good voice of reason here? Oh, what about the dad character? He's been on one side of this argument. Maybe this is the thing that pushes him over to the other side. And now he's like, actually, this is good what you did. And then he looks at the audience, he goes, no, it's really smart and good what she did.
It's so great. But I think you're right. But then it keeps going. It doesn't stop there, because all that stuff where the dad finally came around to killing is good because it's for the kids, she has to flip it back on him and reveal now she's a morally conflicted character. And she goes, no, Dad, I really did it for me. I didn't do it for the kids. And she gives a speech about how she's tired of living in fear and never having power over her own safety. She basically convinces him, lays out a whole argument why, no, this wasn't about the kids. So if that's why you thought it was cool for me to kill Jimmy, that wasn't it. And he's like, okay, nevertheless, times have changed. And violence is okay now. You do what you got to do. That's not a direct quote, but it's pretty close to what he says.
It's not a direct quote. It might be the exact. It's her Walter White moment. Yeah, where she goes, I didn't do it for you guys. I did it because I was good at it and I liked it. But again, this is the movie trying to cash in on chips that it just didn't earn. And then the dad goes from not only condoning murder, but maybe participating in it. There's a climactic scene where Kathy calls all her people for backup and he's there holding a bat. What if that whole confrontation went sideways? Now he's going to commit murder.
He's ready to throw down.
For crime. I guess we can kind of get to the ending because this is the second to last scene almost. The next scene is Kathy's going to her meetup with Ruby, who we mentioned is lying in wait with Gabriel to murder her. And that's where her father is standing with the bat and all the neighborhood people. But what a very anticlimactic confrontation this ends up being, right? Because Gabriel's there and he's like trying to read her the riot act about getting Claire killed, but like he just can't muster it. He can't get the passion. No. He's like, she was the only reason I came back. And then he puts his gun down. He's like, nah, whatever. And he just like walks away. And then like we're led to believe he just leaves the neighborhood and never comes back. Oh, okay. It's so nonchalant. He's just like, okay. I think that he literally says okay and walks past them. They part like the Red Sea.
That's another
he just
unintentional laugh moment. It's funny. And I guess it makes sense. He was kind of always this dead-eyed creep instead of being a very emotional character. The romance with Claire brought out his only signs of emotionality that we saw. But man, yeah, wouldn't it have been nice to have him break down there? And that line about the only reason I was in this was for her, wouldn't that be a good tearful moment instead of another sort of cold, dead-eyed moment?
And Gleeson can play it. Like he's got the chops to do that scene. I think that would have been good. And then we've revealed that Ruby, not only was she conspiring with Common to run things, she also conspired with Common to get their husbands arrested in the first place. So now Claire's dead, who we're supposed to believe is Kathy's best friend. Her husband is dead. Her children don't have a father anymore. She's in this very precarious situation now where she's trying to be a crime boss and a mother and have a family and still kind of be virtuous to some degree, all because of Ruby. And then Ruby goes even further and tries to set her up to be murdered right now. But they're like, you know what? It's okay. I forgive forgive you. Let's go make some money together. The movie just ends. Fuck you talking about, man?
Yeah, maybe it thought it was doing some of that Godfather drama where it's like you close the door on the family at the end because you're fully into the mob life. But it doesn't play because, unfortunately, as much as I like Melissa McCarthy, she can't play that hardened gangster. Like, it doesn't come across. It comes across as that she's always the goody sweetheart. And I can't reconcile it with all the things that her character does.
That's why it's hard to parse really what was motivating them, because when they're not getting enough money from the Irish mob in the beginning and they got rent to pay and their kids need food and all this stuff, you're like, okay, I can understand out of desperation doing this. But then when they're wealthy, at least by Hell's Kitchen standards at the time, they have all the jewelry they could ever want. They have stacks of cash. They keep doing it. And if the movie was trying to say that she became addicted to the power and the money, it just, maybe she was miscast too. I praised her for her portrayal here. Maybe I was thinking about it wrong. Maybe I was thinking she was trying to play it as if she was conflicted and trying to survive. But like you said, she's too likable an actor to really sell the descent into corruption.
For better or worse, she ends up pointing out the Hollywoodized parts of the movie where it's like, oh, it's okay to be a good mom and a gangster at the same time.
You can have it all. That was The Kitchen. Not my favorite movie. I wouldn't recommend this to anyone. I would recommend Widows to most people. But
yeah, I'm going to watch that next and get this taste out of my mouth.
You want to kind of hear what they've been doing since then?
For sure. What happened to all these people?
So Andrea Berloff has a screenwriting trademark, I guess you'd say. She loves putting children in danger.
Okay.
So she's written World Trade Center, Straight Outta Compton, Bloodfather, and Sleepless, and an upcoming movie called The Mother. Now, she's not directing that one. She's just writing it. So she's back to writing for now. It is a action thriller starring Jennifer Lopez. Just based on the synopsis, I know that her children are in danger and she has to go help them. While fleeing from dangerous assailants, an assassin comes out of hiding to protect the daughter she left earlier in her life. Then we've got her other movies. So World Trade Center and Straight Outta Compton. World Trade Center, certainly there were children in danger, but that's not really what we're talking about here. Bloodfather was a Mel Gibson movie that she wrote. Bloodfather also has to do with a father coming out to save his kids.
Okay.
And Sleepless, which was a Jamie Foxx movie I didn't hate, came out in 2017. It was a bomb and it got pretty bad reviews, but I kind of like it. I don't know why. He's a cop who has to face off against mobsters who have kidnapped his son. So she really
she's leaning on that.
She leans on the kids in danger quite a bit. But anyway, this movie, The Mother, which is coming out this year, I think it's going direct to Netflix. We don't have a firm release date yet, but it still says 2022. Filming is completed. I'm assuming they're into post-production now. It's probably not going to be the best movie ever made, but there's some people in it I like. Jennifer Lopez, Omari Hardwick, Joseph Fiennes. Should be like a fun way to spend an evening.
It seems like the failure of The Kitchen did not send her directly to director jail, and she's making serious productions.
Well, she's not directing that one, so she might be in director jail, but she's not in Hollywood jail.
She's not in writer jail. It's good to have two careers. Stay out of writer jail.
Yeah, diversify. So we've already kind of covered McCarthy's career, and not much has changed since the Happy Time Murders episode, but I will give a quick overview. This was her first movie after the very well-reviewed Can You Ever Forgive Me, which is a great movie, and 2 movies removed from the Happy Time Murders, which we talked about at length already. Super Intelligence was a comedy that got mixed reviews, went straight to HBO Max in November 2020, and is only notable because it's one of the movies that was removed from HBO Max for tax purposes recently. They quietly took a bunch. They took like An American Pickle, a few of like the movies they had bought to go straight to streaming around that time. They took them off because I guess it's not considered an asset on your books anymore. It lowers your tax payment somehow. I don't understand it. And they don't have to pay residuals, I guess.
I got to do that with my DVD collection. Maybe I can save some money.
Exactly. So I never saw that. But then she was in Nine Perfect Strangers, which got good reviews, was a show that came out recently.
I saw a little bit of that.
How was it?
It was all right. Her character ended up a little bit one note and annoying, but then again, I didn't finish it, so I shouldn't say anything.
Okay. She was in a Netflix comedy called God's Favorite Idiot with her husband, Ben Falcone. It's a show. It got bad reviews and it just came out in June and I've never heard of it. So I'm guessing we're not getting a season 2 of that. Do you know who Ben Falcone is? Can you picture him?
I can picture him. Didn't he show up in the Happy Time Murders for a second?
Oh, I think he did. I remember him mostly from New Girl and Happy Endings. He was always popping up on the funny shows from the 2010s, usually for an episode or two. But he was good in those. I think he's a funny guy. But for whatever reason, his collaborations with his wife usually aren't the most well received, at least critically.
One of these days, they'll get it right.
She hasn't been in a good movie in a while, but she is going to be in The Little Mermaid as Ursula. And then she'll be in Unfrosted, which is a Jerry Seinfeld-led comedy about Pop-Tarts.
It's about time we had a Jerry Seinfeld Pop-Tart comedy.
Is he going to play a Pop-Tart Pop-Tart who is weirdly sexual with human women, because if that's going to be his on-screen persona since the B movie, I'd be into it. Like, let's lean all the way in. The B movie is way too horny. You've seen it, right?
I have not. I've heard about its horniness. It's legendary, but I've never sat down with it.
Its horniness is legendary should be on like the back of the DVD. Ian Dukes.
I'm ready to blurb all Jerry Seinfeld productions at this point.
So Tiffany Haddish has been working pretty consistently. She's got some good movies under her belt. On the Count of Three, which was Gerard Carmichael's recent film that I really enjoyed.
Oh,
She's
neat.
in that. She's in The Card Counter, which is a movie we both liked, maybe didn't love.
Falls a little short, but it's ambitious and stylish.
Exactly. It doesn't quite hit the mark, but they're going for something. An Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. I thought she was pretty good in that. I like that movie. quite a
Yeah, I
bit.
like that movie too.
She's also in Easter Sunday, which just came out. I think it's getting mixed reviews, but it looked pretty funny from the previews.
Easter Sunday in summer?
Don't ask me to explain it. I haven't seen it. She's going to be in the upcoming Haunted Mansion and Landscape with Invisible Hand.
Okay.
And she's also been on Tuca and Birdie, which was brought back from the dead and is still
Right.
going.
Neat.
And she was in the really good Apple TV series, The After Party, which I rather enjoyed.
Good for her.
I don't know if that's going to be another season of that, but that was the Sam Richardson. Great cast in that. I highly recommend checking it out if you have Apple TV Plus.
I'm going to look it up.
Moss is obviously staying busy. She was on The Handmaid's Tale and is still on The Handmaid's Tale. They got to end that fucking thing. I'm sorry. I really like it, but it can't go on forever.
This seems like a long time. I did not know that it was still going.
It's so bleak. At some point, it's misery porn. I don't need it to be like immediate. Just be like, okay, 2 more seasons, then it's wrapping up. Just so I know that we're going to get a resolution, because you can't just watch these characters get tortured over and over and over again.
That's a reasonable thing to ask.
But it is well made. I do enjoy it. She's very good in it. She's been making movies here and there. I think her TV schedule keeps her pretty busy, but she's in Shirley, the very good Invisible Man movie. I don't know if you had a chance to check that out. It's quite good.
I was too scared. I got scared off. I'm going to have to try it at a later date.
That would be a fun double feature with this movie, because she's playing kind of a battered woman who's been abused, but the way her character reacts to it, I think, is much better. It's not an easy watch by any means, but
Yeah.
I'd say it's more harrowing than scary, if that helps.
That does.
She was in The French Dispatch. She's going to be in the upcoming Taika Waititi film, Next Goal Wins. And she was also on Shining Girls on Apple TV, which I've heard is really good, and I'm going to start watching soon.
Cool.
I know you're an Apple TV subscriber, so I'll let you know if it's good. You might want to check it out.
Yeah, for sure.
Sadly, still a Scientologist, but what can you do? Then Dom Gleeson, because we're not sure if his name is Domnhall or Domnhall.
Domnhall?
Abdominal Gleeson.
Donald Gleeson. Donald.
There we
Has
go.
only been in 2 movies since this one. Star Wars Rise of Skywalker, one of my least favorite movies of all time, I'd say. A movie I absolutely hate. And Peter Rabbit 2, The Runaway. So if you've made 2 movies and Peter Rabbit 2, The Runaway is the better, things aren't going great. But he's been busy on TV as well.
Okay.
He was on Run, which was a show I quite liked with Merritt Weaver. That was an interesting show. I don't know if I ended up liking it by the end, but it kept me interested. I ended up finishing it.
Okay.
But they were both very good in it. I just think maybe
Yeah.
the writing wasn't as tight as it could have been. Frank of Ireland, which I have not seen or heard of. The
yeah.
Patient and White House Plumbers. All these shows sound made up, but they're apparently real. So doesn't seem like any of the actors' careers are stalled.
No.
Maybe Ms. Verloff's directing career is on hold. But again, this was her debut. You would hope that maybe she learned some tips and tricks in the making of this one. It's like a first pancake. And she's clearly not untalented as a writer, certainly.
Yeah.
So if she made another movie, I wouldn't not go see it just because I didn't like this one. I'd be willing to give it a shot.
Yeah, this was a movie of mistakes, and we don't know. This thing could have been just chewed up by the studio system. And a lot of these scenes that look like they're terribly written could have just had the crap edited out of them and turned into mush by studio notes. So we don't want to judge too harshly.
I think this movie, more than almost any we've ever covered, illustrates to me how small the differences between a good and a bad movie can be. Like, you just had to turn the dial a little bit for certain scenes, and you might have a good movie on your hands. If some plot lines were handled better and some scenes were maybe written a little clearer, maybe some scenes were better acted, this could have been at least a serviceable movie. I don't think it was ever going to be the next Goodfellas, but
Right.
there's something
Could have been
here
solid, yeah.
that they just kind of veered away. They took their eye off the prize for a little too long.
One of the reviews that I read said this movie felt like a trailer for itself, which I thought was astute.
I like
And my
that.
way of saying the same thing. I had the same feeling, and my version of it was it feels like an outline that didn't get fleshed in. So it has all these beats. They know what they want the characters to do, but they just didn't flesh it in with like real life stuff, with stuff that felt real and true and consistent. It seems like a little more work. You could have got it over the line.
You said something very insightful about this movie and about how comic book movies can sometimes turn on themselves and kind of cannibalize their own material. Do you remember what it was?
My little theory about comic adaptations is that what we see comic writers doing in graphic novels is they borrow from movies. They're using movie tropes as shorthand because it's so effective. You have a limited number of panels, images, words. You can't fit that much text on a page. A lot of it's referential. It's using stuff in spirit that we recognize. Oh, this is the part where the assassin comes and does the thing, and you only have a few panels to show that. And those were successful. Hollywood Hollywood got into it, started adapting those comics back into movies, and they end up making a copy of a copy. So it's already a copy of something from the movies that's simplified in a comic book. And now you have to draw it out of there back into the movies, and it can become unintelligible. Or in this case, it can become more work than they were prepared to handle. Because the gaps, like you said, you commented on it very well at the beginning. We fill in a lot of blanks. We forgive comics a lot of stuff. It's almost like an old-fashioned theatrical format where they paint in broad strokes and we go with it, even if it would sound cheesy for an actor to say that line to us on screen. This movie just needed a lot more work to close those gaps and to not just be a trailer for itself.
And I think what you said about it feeling like a copy of a copy ties into your other statement about it feeling like a thinly fleshed out outline. They had some ideas, but like even the scenes that work don't tie into any other scenes in the movie. So you're almost rewarding it for succeeding with no context. Like none of this ties together. We can praise small things, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make a good movie.
Unfortunately not.
And the movie did not have a ton of competition at the box office either. It was released at kind of high time for a movie to be a hit. August, summertime, it's prime movie going. Hobbs and Shaw came out the week before. That took second place. That took first place the week this was released, still made $25 million. But the only other new releases that week were Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, Dora and the Lost City of Gold, and The Art of Racing in the Rain. None of those are going to compete with The Kitchen for its audience. It's an R-rated adult drama. Even Hobbs and Shaw, which is a PG-13 action movie, is going to attract a slightly different audience. You probably lose some viewers to Hobbs and Shaw, but not a ton, and still dropped 60% the next week, all the way to 13th place in its second week with a wide theatrical release. 2,700 theaters or something, I think.
It's not just us, folks. This movie is just really not very good. Like, it's not worth people going paying money for it.
I can't say much about next week's movie because I've never seen it. I don't even know. I think it was not greatly reviewed, but I don't remember much about the discourse around it when it came out. We're going to be talking about Tolkien, the biopic about J.R.R. Tolkien, tying into the new Lord of the Rings series coming to Amazon Prime in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
So we're going to be diving into the man's life. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. I think you have a bit of an affinity for it as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm totally uninterested in watching this movie, so we're going to see how that plays out.
I know. I think it's like 3 hours long, too. It's going to fucking suck.
Oh, shit. Are you sure this is the way we capitalize on Lord of the Rings fever?
Should we just change it now? I'll change it right now. I don't give a fuck.
Most boring end of the spectrum. What was his childhood like? This guy who made up a bunch of elf languages in his spare time.
I think we've covered just too many like crime movies lately. We got to slow it down. We got to do some drama.
You just know he's going to be the worst English super nerd ever.
It's Nicholas Hoult, who I like the actor. Finnish director Dome Kurakowski. It was only 112 minutes. Whew. Okay. All right.
That's reasonable.
All right. Oh, Lily Collins is in it too. I like Lily Collins. She's good.
I'm going to try to keep an open mind.
Yeah, this movie's got a 51% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, means like
it's perfectly inoffensive and bland.
Yeah, this movie's going to be so boring, but hopefully we won't be boring.
We're going to find an angle, folks. Don't trust us. I didn't mean to say don't trust us. What I'm trying to say is trust us. We're going to drink some coffee. We're going to get through this movie.
We sure will. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Please remember, rate, review, subscribe to the pod. If you're not already subscribed, leave a rating and review if you can. Some platforms let you, some don't. Use your judgment there. Follow us on Twitter at BlastZonePod for little movie jokes, sneak peeks of the upcoming episodes.
Funny
Talk
funs.
to you in the comments. It's good times. You can email us, blastzonepod@gmail.com. We had a flurry of email activity. It slowed down. We like getting the emails. We've put some of your suggestions on the schedule coming soon.
Yeah, we're responsive. Don't think your email's going into a black hole. John runs it right up the flagpole, and we execute on these bits of consumer-driven decision-making.
Absolutely. So hit us up on there, and we will see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.